So we have our modal component now, which is over here. But what if we want to now pass some data into the component from the parent component where it's nested right here? For example, instead of hard coding the header text and the content text, we could pass that data into the components from the app.view component where we use it. Now we do this by using what's known as props in Vue, and we can pass props from a parent component to a child component. But first of all, why would we do this? Well, there are two main reasons for doing this. First of all, it makes components more reusable. In our case, it means that the modal component could easily be reused in different parts of the website for different things, because we won't be hard coding the messages or the content inside it, and instead we would be passing that data in as a prop. And each time you use the modal, you could pass different content into it as a prop from its parent component. Now, you couldn't do that if the content was hard coded as it is right now, because then whenever we use the modal, it will always have the same content inside it. So using props makes it more dynamic and more reusable. Secondly, it means that if we have multiple components and they all use the same data, whether that be text or an array of items or something else, it means that we only have to define that data in one single place. For example, we could have two components in our application which need to use the same array of user data, for example. Well, we could define that array of user data in the parent component, so in the root component maybe, and then we could pass in that data as props into whatever components need it. So if we have two different components that need that data, we could pass that data in as props to both of those components. Now, this is known as having a single source of truth, the truth being the data. If we didn't do this, then we'd have to define the data in every component it's used in, which is not efficient. And we'd also have trouble keeping the data consistent across the app if it ever needed to change. So they are the two main reasons for defining data in a parent component and passing it down into another component as a prop. So let's try doing this with our modal. So the way we pass a prop into a component is very simple. We go to the component and we just add on an attribute. That attribute is the prop and it can be called whatever you want. For example, I could pass in a prop called header and set it equal to something. So I'm going to set it equal to a string like sign up for the giveaway. And now I'm passing this string as a prop into the modal component, and the name of that prop is header. So now, what if I want to use this prop, this data, inside the modal component? Well, the first thing we need to do is tell Vue that this component should accept a certain prop, otherwise it won't know about it. And the way we do that is inside a script tag, we need our component object. So let me create that. I'm going to say export default and then the object, and inside here we need a property called props, and that is going to be an array, and all we need to do is pass in any values or any props that we will be accepting into this component. Well, we passed one in called header, so I can just say right here header like so, in quotations. It must be in a string. So now I can use that inside the template. So you know, like before when we saw the data function and then inside that we returned different properties in the object like title, and that could be something. We could then use the title inside the template. We can do the same thing with the header because it's now being accepted as a prop, but we don't need to define it in any kind of data function. We just automatically have it now because we passed it in over here and we registered it right here. So if I want to output the header, I can do it just like I would any other kind of data right here, like so. And now we should see this message that we passed in right here. So now it's no longer hard-coded, it's a dynamic prop value instead. If I save it, then we should see sign up for the giveaway. Awesome. So I can also pass in other props as well if I wanted to. You don't just get to pass in one prop, you can pass in as many as you want. So let me go back to app.view and I'm going to say right here another one called text, and I'm going to set that equal to a string. Grab your Ninja Swag for half price. I'm going to save it. I need to accept it as a prop in the component. So that's text, and then I want to output it right here. So let's do that, text. And if I save it, we can see now we get that text right here. Awesome. So that's how we create these different props. Now, sometimes it's not always going to be a string that you pass into a component as a prop. For example, you might want to pass through a Boolean, or you might want to pass in a number or an array of data. Well, you can't really do that inside these things right here because these are just strings. So for example, I couldn't say right here an array whereby the first element inside that is Sean and the second element is 4. If I try to do that, that is not going to be an array, it's going to be a string that looks like this, and we can see it right here. So in order to do this, we'd have to actually data bind to this. If I was to put a colon right here, now this is an array, because remember, when we use a colon, we're binding to whatever data we want. Now that could be a data property down here, or you could directly create that data inside the quotation marks. So if I save this now, then over here, this is actually an array now, and you could do something different with it inside this component, like cycle through it. Now, I don't want to do that. Instead, I will bind to it, but I will take the previous value and store that down here. So I've just cut it, and I'm going to call this header, and that will be this value. And then I'm going to do the same thing for this. So grab that and say text, and it's this value, and then I'm going to bind to these and pass through the header like so, and over here I'm going to say this is the text and bind to that as well. And the reason I'm doing this is because first of all, it looks a lot nicer here, it's not as verbose, and secondly, we might have some functionality down here whereby we change the header or the text, and so it's easier to update what's going into the modal as props as well. So this is still going to work, all right? And this is the kind of pattern I'll probably use most of the time as we go forward with props. So let's do one more prop example. I'm going to add a third one, and I will call this theme. So I'm going to allow the developer to pass through a custom theme prop into the modal. And then based on the value of that theme inside the modal, which we could check, we could add a conditional class to style it differently. For example, I could say the value of this is going to be sale. And then inside the modal, we could check the value of the theme prop. Let me just register it first of all. If that theme prop is equal to sale, we could give this a class of sale and style it red or something to make it stand out. So it makes the component a bit more customizable as well as reusable. So let me do that. I'm going to data bind to the class attribute, and it doesn't matter that we already have a class right here. We can still add another one which we data bind to. We're not data binding to this because this is a straightforward static class, but now this is going to be dynamic. And remember, we saw how we output dynamic classes before. We pass in an object with key value pairs. The key is the conditional class that we might give it, and the value is going to be a Boolean. If it's true, then we apply that class. If it's false, then we don't. So the class name would be sale, which is the key of the object, and we need to pass through an expression. Now I want to check, is this theme prop equal to sale? Because if it is, then I want to apply this. So I can say theme, which we can use because we have that prop, and is it triple equal to sale? Now this is obviously going to be true if we pass sale in right here, and false if we pass something else in. So let me just test this out. I'm going to save it and inspect this element over here. We should now have that class of sale, which we do. We can see that right there. If we change this to something else, then we shouldn't have that class of sale. All right, so all we need to do now is style that class, and we can do that down here. So let me say, first of all, sale, or rather modal dot sale. So any modal which also has the sale class, I'm going to give a background, and that background is going to be crimson, which is kind of like a red color. And also the color of the text is going to be white. And then after that, I'll say modal dot sale, and then the H1 inside that, and that is going to be white as well. All right, so now if we preview this, whenever we have a sale value inside the theme prop, it should be styled differently. Let's check it out. Yep, and it looks different. So now we could create customizable modal components based on the theme that we pass through. If it's a different one, then it's not going to get that style. So this is kind of like the default style. And by the way, props are optional, so I don't have to pass it in. I could save it. Just because we accept it right here doesn't mean it has to be there. If it's not there, it will just be undefined. So this therefore would be false, and we don't get that sale class, as we can see. So that is the default value. And you can see how you could use this to create different themes. So you could pass in another theme which was dark to color the modal dark, and again you could check for that class or that value of theme right here to add a dark class. All right, so I hope that makes sense, and this is how we pass data as props into components, which A, makes them more reusable, B, makes them customizable, and C, allows us to have a single source of truth when it comes to data.